2001 was a different time. The closest that we had to social media were bulletin boards and Usenet news groups. The internet was still primarily a dial-up experience. And even a photo could take a good few minutes to download. So you have to admire the ambition of 33-year-old Paul "Freck" Morgan, who launched an ambitious plan for a live video feed. And not just any feed. Oh no. Morgan planned to cut off his own feet whilst watched by goggle-eyed subscribers. Whether this was a sincere plan, a hoax, or a form of protest remains a matter of debate. But it's also a story that comes with a disturbing coda. Some background to this. Morgan, known to all as Freck on account of the freckles that he had as a child, was a man who had suffered a major spinal injury in 1986 when he fell out of a truck and was run over by the boat that it was towing. By any standards, that's an incredibly unlucky way to suffer a life-changing injury, I think we can all agree. After a series of operations, he could just about walk with the help of leg braces, but had no feeling from the ankles down. By 2001, medical technology had advanced to the stage where Morgan's feet could be replaced by prosthetics that would greatly improve the quality of his life. But sadly, he lived in America and his medical insurance didn't deem the operation necessary. As was stated on his website, since Paul is on Medicare/Medicaid, his insurance will not cover the amputation and new prosthetics because it is not deemed a necessary procedure. Paul also receives medical disability and his Medicare plan does not even cover the cost of his catheter bag. Paul doesn't want to fight a no-win battle with the insurance and medical communities in the United States. Paul is using this event as a chance to speak out against the lack of care in the medical field and the insurance industry. He strongly believes that this could make great strides in the much-needed insurance and medical reform in the United States. This amputation is simply Paul's way of saying that even though corporate America has refused him, he will get his new prosthetics and improve the quality of life. So he came up with a radical idea. Rejecting his friend Kevin Nicholson's suggestion that he placed his legs on a railroad track and let nature take its course, a method that might well work but which probably came with all manner of complications, from the uncertainty that an amputation would be precise to the difficulty in obtaining help before bleeding to death. He instead decided to kill 2 birds or 2 feet with 1 stone. Using a homemade guillotine, he would cut off his feet live on the internet, watched by anyone who'd paid $20 for the pleasure, thus covering his medical costs while also making a dramatic statement about the awfulness of the American healthcare system. Essentially, Morgan was inventing GoFundMe decades before it existed. Morgan's website tootled along relatively unnoticed until he called into the Howard Stern show to plug it. Then, as you might expect, everything exploded. The news media picked up on his story and the site hits hugely increased.
Well, it sounds like something from the French Revolution.
A man having his feet cut off by a steel guillotine. No, it isn't 17th century France, but 21st century Mississippi. Paul Morgan is willing to chop off his own feet. And the topper? He'll let you watch the event live on the internet. News Channel 12's Darren Dito tries to make sense of it all in tonight's Unexplained Report.
Steel and all that. I want to make sure it goes through on the first whack.
Meet Paul Morgan, a.k.a. Freck. He wants to do something very out of the ordinary.
Like, oh, Paul, we could make some money. We could chop your feet off with a train on the internet.
Luckily, Paul didn't take his friend's advice, but he is going to cut his feet off. For $20, he'll let you watch him do it live on the internet.
Because the feet are going to have to come off anyway to have the amputation, so I'm going to take my feet off this way to raise the money I need to get the prosthetics.
Yes, you heard right. Paul is going to chop his feet off with a homemade guillotine. You see, Paul injured his legs in a car crash back in 1986. He can walk, but barely. He says his insurance company won't pay for an operation. That's why he's selling internet subscriptions for $20 so people can watch him amputate his feet.
They were regarded as unnecessary surgery because even though my feet and my lower legs are totally debilitated and atrophied, they're in no way a danger to my health.
Paul says he needs to raise over $100,000 to pay for the prosthetics and future surgeries. You have to admit, Paul seems a little crazy, especially since the Attorney General's office offered to get him some help.
So they had offered a surgeon in Jackson who actually would cut off my legs for free. Now, they didn't offer any kind of rehabilitation or amputation, or prosthetics.
Paul says he needs extra money for post-surgery procedures. Now, the AG's office could stop Paul's plans. Officials refused to comment on camera, but they told us Paul might be violating the state's mayhem statute, the one passage that pertains to Paul mutilating or destroying a limb. If convicted, a person could face jail time. The law aside, what about the safety issue? Paul says he'll receive a sedative and wear tourniquets on his legs.
I've already secured the efforts of EMTs locally as well as around the country who will be there on site.
Paul will go to the hospital immediately after the cut. As morbid as it sounds, Paul is looking forward to dropping the blade.
To me, this is going to be much more of a celebration. People are like, you seem a little too excited about it. For me, it's going to be a celebration. This is a beginning of a whole new way of life for me.
Paul is scheduled to chop his feet off on November 30th. If he doesn't raise enough money, he says he'll give his voyeuristic fan club members a rebate. In Search of the Unexplained, I'm Darren Dito, News Channel 12.
And this just in, it looks like Paul's fans will have to wait another month to see Paul do his duty because of construction and web delays. The event is now scheduled for January the 5th at an undisclosed location on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Everyone was fascinated by the story, but no one knew how genuinely serious it was. And this would essentially be his downfall. While the world was watching the story unfold, very few people were actually handing over any money. That's understandable. There just wasn't the online fundraising infrastructure at that time. Even PayPal was still a niche thing and prone to cancelling accounts that it found problematic, a category that live amputation for entertainment may well have fallen into. Even if people wanted to help Morgan out, it wasn't easy. You literally had to mail him money, and it definitely didn't seem to be a safe investment for many. $20 in 2001 is equivalent to $36 today. Not a huge amount of money, but perhaps more than most people wanted to risk on a possible scam. On top of that, many were just reveling in the sheer absurdity of the site. Morgan needed to raise something like $150,000 to pay for surgery, prosthetics and other things, and his income, as the various changing deadlines came and went, remained stubbornly under $500. To make things worse, his sense of priorities seemed a touch skewed. Not only did he plan to hire a full production crew for something that, even in 2001, could have been shot on a camcorder, but he even had a band booked. Why not go the whole hog and set the show up in a big top? And on top of that, the Stern interview had alerted the authorities to the plan, and they were not best pleased. Apparently, just because America has a terrible healthcare service does not mean that you're free to perform DIY surgery, especially for paying viewers. Mississippi's Attorney General offered to have doctors in Jackson look at Morgan's feet, an offer that we might note fell rather short of any kind of promise to actually do anything afterwards, and suggested that his planned amputation would be in violation of the splendidly named mayhem laws, as well as fraud regulations. They may have been onto something with the latter suggestion, as Morgan's dates for cutting off his feet came and went with some regularity. Obviously, the lack of funds was a major issue, but the people who had paid up must have been wondering just when the promised chopping was going to happen. Most frustrated must have been Jared Pillone of Pompano Beach, Florida, who'd won the competition to attend the chopping live in an all-expenses-paid trip, and who was presumably continually making and cancelling plans for his big day out. This was, again, long before Kickstarter and the like made elastic delivery dates commonplace. Back then, people who paid money for something expected that thing to be delivered. The first planned date was September the 19th, 2001. Of course, America was still reeling from events of a week earlier at that time, so it's quite likely that no one was really in the mood to watch him chop off his feet at that point. Possibly he had other things on his mind too. The date was put back to November the 30th, then to January the 5th. But Morgan seemed determined to go ahead. He'd secured medical assistance to ensure that he didn't bleed to death and was going to build his guillotine from his own plans in a secret location to prevent the police from showing up and spoiling everything. Unfortunately, he ultimately seems to have been let down by everyone. The final message on his site read, "Corporate lawyers have caused me to lose several members of the crew, the satellite truck, and the initially interested investors who were covering the production costs of the amputation event. This being the case, the amputation of my feet by guillotine is postponed until the production money for the event has been secured." A man chopping off his own feet on video is, by any estimation, a risky investment. You can't see this pitch going very far on Dragon's Den or Shark Tank. And indeed, Morgan seemed ultimately unsuccessful in his financial plans. The website was last updated late in 2001. The planned January amputation came and went, as did the whole site within a few months. This radical bit of live broadcasting never happened. There are those who, understandably, suspect that the whole thing was a hoax, or at best a piece of performance art. But what little outside evidence there is does suggest that the whole thing was a genuine, if woefully misguided idea by a man pushed to the edge. And that's what everybody seemed to forget about this story. At its heart was a man so desperate for the medical help that was beyond his finances that he was willing to chop off his own feet, with all the inherent risks that come with that, for other people's entertainment. It's rather ironic that the one thing that no one seemed to take from this whole project, be it real or hoax, was the protest against the American healthcare system, which seemed to be the real purpose of the stunt. Here was a man pushed to extremes, but all people were concerned about were the legalities of the act and the tastelessness of the concept. However, while many have dismissed this story as a hoax, Morgan was not the only person driven to such measures. In 2014, British man Mark Goddard used a homemade guillotine to chop off his own hand after 16 years of agonising nerve pain following a motorcycle crash. Refused amputation by the NHS, he took matters into his own hands, finishing the job with a knife and then throwing the severed hand onto a fire to avoid any attempts at reattachment. While Goddard's actions were done in private, they very much followed those planned by Morgan. These are just the cases that we know of. Who knows how many other people have been driven to desperate measures by medical indifference and costs. As it is, I have no idea if Morgan ever did cut his feet off or found a trade surgeon to do it for him. No one really knows if the whole thing was a hoax or public protest or if he was serious. After his last updates in 2002, he essentially vanished from the internet and nobody seems to know the ending of the story. In fact, that did seem to be the ending of the story. Something that was quickly forgotten as part of the wacky early days of the internet, either a complete scam, because Morgan certainly never did cut off his feet for a paying audience, or a mad plan that fizzled out. Within a couple of years, the whole story had become little more than a fading memory of the internet's Wild West. This is where most versions of this story tend to end, and if you want this to remain a curious, eccentric tale of an oddball internet phenomenon from years ago, you should probably stop watching now, because things are about to take a very dark turn. Don't say I didn't warn you. Researching this story and what happened after the website went off air would take me down a strange and increasingly unsettling rabbit hole that finally led to reports of Morgan's conviction in 2005 of 2 counts of touching of a child or a mentally defective, incapacitated or physically helpless person for lustful purposes, and 1 of child molestation. Morgan was sentenced to 8 years in prison, which means that he was released well over a decade ago. His continued freedom since hopefully means that he's avoided reoffending. While incarcerated, he waged a pointless war against the Mississippi prison system and everyone connected to it, with numerous lawsuits over the denial of or delay to adequate medical treatment, improper conditions of confinement, violation of his freedom of religion, violation of his right to be free from illegal searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment, denial of access to courts, an inadequate administrative remedy program, and the violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, all of which were unsuccessful. The details of this legal battle are where any hopes that this was a different Paul Morgan are crushed. This unfortunate turn of events might explain why he so quickly slid into obscurity and has remained there ever since. What was once a strange, rather sad and very weird tale has taken on a rather nasty turn, and I would imagine that Morgan, if he has any sense whatsoever, is doing his best to keep a very low profile. This is a depressing and unpleasant end to the story, certainly not the one I would have ever expected. It's my own fault for chasing this story further than was possibly necessary, I suppose, but once again, it just goes to show we can't have nice things. Anyway, if you find this sort of curious tale fascinating despite the nasty turn, then make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, click the alert bell so you don't miss any of our future posts. Frankly, it'll be a miracle if this video is monetized, so in the spirit of online fundraising, if you appreciate what I do here and the amount of work involved, then you might want to support The Overlooked Hotel via Patreon, where you can find unedited versions of the videos that have been a bit too problematic for this platform, as well as exclusive content. Or you can tip me through Buy Me a Coffee. For less than a cost of a single drink, you can ensure that I carry on doing this sort of thing more often and continue to improve our production values. In any case, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.